Hello everybody, it's AJ back again with the Mighty Glue Stick, and today we're going to be covering one of the classic monsters of Dungeons & Dragons, the Purple Worm. Much loved by people who are into craftwork and making their own miniatures, because the Purple Worm is one of the more fun things that you can make, and anybody who's involved in DM Scotty's Crafts and Games group on Facebook will know that. So, where does it come from? What is it? What does it do? These are the questions I am here to answer for you. So the Purple Worm stems right back to 1974-1976. It was one of the first monsters introduced in the earliest edition of the game in the Dungeons & Dragons White Box set in 1974. The mottled worm made its appearance in Dungeons & Dragons supplement Blackmore, and also there was a mention of it in one of the earlier Dragon magazines. However, the mottled worm is not in fact a separate species of purple worm. It's just purple worms that are underwater. And that could be any purple worm, and I'll get to that in a minute. Explain why they're called mottled worms. So that was in Dragon magazine number 68, but it's really just a couple of sentences, so not even worth a look. However, Purple Worm gets a much better article in Dragon magazine 282, the Ecology of the Purple Worm, along with an excellent story by Ed Greenwood, and it's that article that I have in my hand right now, which I'm going to be explaining some of the nuances of Purple Worm ecology to you. So, what are they? It's a worm. It's a very, very large worm. They are not exactly, they're opportunistic predators that really just go about their business and are attracted to sensations in the ground, tremors, and they'll consume anything in their path which sets off their motion trigger. So they don't necessarily hunt humanoids or make a beeline towards communities and things like that. They all just burrow through the earth, and through sheer happenstance you may come across them in your travels, particularly if you're underground and in areas that they frequent. It lairs underground. They don't necessarily like being above ground very much, and when they're travelling through the ground, they've got a burrowing speed which is around about half of their normal speed. So above ground they travel at 50 foot and they burrow at 30 feet. So that's extremely rapid, really. That's as fast as a humanoid can move. And on the surface they can move extremely quickly because of their huge size. They burrow through solid rock at half its burrowing speed and leave a 10-foot diameter tunnel in their wake when they're travelling through solid rock. Otherwise, through loose rock or broken up rock, they can travel a lot quicker. They typically they will tunnel through, and they'll create tunnels in the Underdark that connect various caverns and things, which is where they have some sort of importance in the overall topography of the Underdark. And purple worms leaving tunnels for miles and miles and miles is one of the reasons why the Underdark is so vast and extensive, and why you can have tunnels that run all the way from one continent to another underground. Also, you'll see areas underground which look like sewer tunnels and things like that. They're so round and perfect, but it's actually because great big purple worms have burrowed their way through. They even make a appearance in the Hobbit Battle of the Five Armies, where the great big tunnelers chew holes through mountains, what the orcs use to flood up from underground passages. So that's quite an interesting development in that movie. They are hermaphrodites, so they contain both sets of sexual organs, and they mate once a year. The worms will basically pass by each other because the reproductive organs are located in different areas of their body, and they sort of match up when they park side by side. They produce an enormous amount of the mucus, which they always tend to exude as they're travelling underground. Make a big jelly sort of sleeping bag of it. It takes a few hours for them to procreate, and then they move off. They mate. They do lay eggs. And I'll get to those in a second. They breathe through the pores on their skin, so they don't actually have lungs. They don't make roaring noises or anything like that. They may make a hissing, blaring sound as they draw in air to their gullet as they're swallowing things, and then burp it out in a roar. But they don't actually breathe, and they don't have vocal cords. Sunlight dries up the mucus coating on their skin, so that they prefer to stay underground, as I mentioned. And because they breathe through all these pores in their bodies, they can breathe quite capably underwater. And when they're underwater, the skin takes on a mottled look as the water washes some areas clear of the mucus coating. And so for years it was believed that the mottled worm was an aquatic variety of the purple worm, but this belief was challenged relatively recently, and now everyone realizes that purple worms underwater are just purple worms underwater. They're not a separate species. They have a prominent jaw spike, which you quite often see omitted from artwork, but classically they had a jaw spike that they would use to escape from its egg, and then later on in its life the worm uses it to loosen up rock and soil as it burrows through. It's an iron hard and as strong as the creature's teeth, and the jaw spike is not used as a weapon. It isn't particularly sharp, but if it's fighting another gargantuan creature, it could be employed as a ramming weapon. A cross-section of a purple worm shows 5 distinct layers. The outermost is the creature's mucus-coated skin, from which the beast's setae emerge. The setae are the little spiky finger-like projections that look like spines that the creature uses to move along with its powerful muscles. So underneath that skin, it's got the ring of muscle that circles each of the creature's numerous segments. Segment-wise, they have at least, they've got well over 20 segments. They've probably got, on average, 30 or more segments to their body. If you lop off the head within the first 5 segments, or the tail within the first 7 segments at the end of the tail, it can actually regenerate and regrow that entire section of its body. So lopping off the tail or the head of a purple worm is not fatal. It will regrow it. As long as it's not past that 5 segments in, if it's more towards the middle of the creature, it starts doing serious damage and can actually kill it. So, inside, so they've got those layers of muscles, and then there's a third layer being a series of long muscles running the length of the worm that connect each ring of muscle in sequence. These long muscles allow the worm to crawl by expanding and contracting its body in sequence. The fourth layer is a hollow space called the coelom, for those who care about such things, which is filled with liquid that acts as a buffer for the innermost layer, the digestive tract. So the coelom also contains its oxygenated blood supply and antibodies and all that sort of stuff. And inside that is its digestive tract. So the coelomic fluid allows the muscles of the digestive tract to keep going about their business, pushing food along despite the movements of the rest of the body. So even if the worm is contracting and flopping around and contorting and taking off at great rates of knots, everything inside the worm will be separated from that and will be traveling through the gut of the worm at a normal pace. Being swallowed by a purple worm is mainly being crushed and burned at the same time. Burned by its stomach acids and crushed by the powerful muscles inside that digestive tract. So they're opportunistic hunters, and they just basically swallow things in their way. They do have eyes. Purple worm's 4 eyes are situated equidistantly around the circumference of its head, and each eye is pointing forward. Thus, it can only really see what's directly ahead of it. They've got thick bony ridges protecting the eyes, and they remain open at all times, even when the worm is resting or in a dormant sleeping state. However, since the worms have poor vision, they rely primarily on their tremor sense, and they are stone deaf. You can yell at a purple worm as much as you want, or make noises and things, but if you're outside of its 60-foot tremor sense radius, it's not going to be aware of your existence unless you're doing something which causes a thump, which the DMA arbitrate actually makes a tremor felt within that 60 feet. So if you're very careful and you're levitating or hovering around, such as if it's in the lair of a beholder, beholders don't set off the tremor sense of the purple worms, so are relatively safe from them. But of course, humans who make any footsteps or anything close to them will be quickly gobbled up. Victims inside the purple worm's gizzard can elect to carve their way out rather than climb out through the mouth. They have to make a strength check against the purple worm's strength. The stats of the purple worm, its strength is titanic. It's 28, which gives them a +9 plus their proficiency to their strength. Their saving throws are Constitution +11, Wisdom +4. Their dexterity is 7 because of their ponderous size. Constitution is 22. Intelligence is 1, being basically an insect. They have one long nerve brain cluster which travels the entire length of their body, but they don't actually have a cerebral structure, a head brain like we do. The wisdom is 8 and the charisma is 4, so they're basically intimidating and instinctual creatures that don't really respond to training that well, but they do respond to stimuli. So it is possible to actually train one to ride it if you're a creature which is adapted to an underground environment. So yeah, being swallowed, they can climb out, fighting against the creature's strength, and they can only be... that's right. It differs somewhat between different editions. So the Dragon Magazine article is a little bit dated, so I'll just go by the in the 5th edition guide here. The swallow creature is blinded and restrained. It has total cover against attacks and other effects outside of the worm, and takes 21 acid damage at the start of each of the worm's turns. So they actually have done away with the crushing damage that you would normally take. And I don't see a lot of information about getting out of it. If the worm takes 30 damage or more in a single turn from a creature inside it, oh well, okay, there we go. It used to be 25 points of damage. It must succeed on a DC 21 Constitution saving throw at the end of its turn, or regurgitate all swallowed creatures which fall prone in a space within 10 feet of the worm. If the worm dies, the swallowed creature is no longer restrained, and it can escape from the corpse by using 20 feet of movement, exiting prone. And of course you want to familiarise yourself with the suffocation rules, because the air inside a purple worm, if there is any, is quite noxious, and I would imagine you don't want to breathe while you're inside there. It'd be quite disgusting. Spellcasting is also difficult when you're inside the worm because of that muscular contraction action. It makes it very difficult to use somatic components, so you can't really move around as agilely as you would normally do. One of the purple worm's most useful senses is its tremor sense, which allows it to pinpoint the location of anything touched the ground within 60 feet of it. Of course, the best way to defeat a worm's tremor sense is to get off the ground. Now, you can use flight magic, levitation, or you can actually just suspend yourself by ropes and things like that, or actually have people carrying a rope if you're got some proficiency in walking a loose rope. You can do that sort of thing. I was going to talk about treasure-wise. Basically, they don't collect treasure; they just sort of chew things up and swallow them. And so you may occasionally find gems and things like that lodged in the ejector, which comes out the back end of the worm. So that can be one way of getting some value out of killing these things. They also have a lot of alchemical value. In that the parts of its body, particularly its blood, are quite useful. So a purple worm blood is reddish with a faint trace of purple to it. It's often used in magical inks used to inscribe the arcane versions of bull strength, endurance, and mass strength in scrolls and things. And that mass strength spell is found in Dragon Magazine 275. Purple worm blood is often used in the creation of manuals of bodily health, which is one of those really cool magical books that you read it and you get some bonuses to your physical stats that are permanent. When seriously injured, purple worms exude a chemical that warns others of their kind away from the area for weeks, much like sharks let off if sharks smell shark blood in the water, they are repelled from the area, which is why shark repellent tends to work. Same thing goes for purple worms. This warning scent can be harvested from the glands of immature purple worms and doused around the entrances to subterranean cities to keep purple worms at bay, which would be, I would imagine, a fairly common practice. So you would find all sorts of examples of that glandular secretion being used in areas which are in purple worm territory. So that's quite interesting. The standard purple worm is gargantuan, being 5 feet in diameter and 80 feet long. However, they can grow into the colossal range, where they are 10 feet in diameter and grow for up to 150 feet in length. So they're colossal. So their strength in that regard is larger. Their constitution is about the same. Dexterity is about the same all across the board, and their hit points would get quite a big boost as well. Their armor class is 18. They've got 247 hit points, so a colossal worm would have probably around double that almost. So we're getting into close to 500 hit points. So yeah, it's a truly epic beast. Like the common earthworm, it has limited sort of regenerative ability. As I mentioned, it can regrow its severed head or tail. The tail has a spike on the end of it. The tail spike is a stinger, and it uses it as a savage jabbing weapon, and it also uses it to anchor itself. So it can actually dig that as like a snow axe. It can sort of dig the spikes and stuff on the end of it there to stop itself being dragged forward, and it can grip into a tunnel and wrench itself backwards. So that's +9 to hit with the 10-foot reach of its tail stinger. It does 19 points of piercing damage, and the target must make a DC 19 Constitution saving throw or take 42 points of poison damage on a failed save, and half as much damage on a successful one. Purple worm venom, or poison, is also a poison which is quite valued on the black market. You'll see it in various supplements. Purple worm poison is quite popular. The bite attack is similar, +9 to hit, 10-foot reach, and a target takes 22 points of piercing damage as it gets munched on. The purple worm has an upper and a lower jaw, and also 2 side jaw parts which come out from inside of the mouth as well. Sometimes they're depicted in artwork, sometimes not. And a creature that is large or smaller must succeed on a DC 19 saving throw for dexterity or be swallowed by the worm, and a swallowed creature is blinded and restrained, etc., etc. So yeah, the purple worm is it's not a creature which forms a lair per se. It'll have a resting space where it's already burrowed something out, and they are pretty omnivorous. They pretty much eat anything in their path. Some forms of protein, of course, are valued, so they will go after humanoids or anything like that. They can sort of sense pattering around amongst them, and they attack savagely and unthinkingly. So they don't use tactics like going after the magic user or anything like that. They'll just attack anybody nearest to them. Their lumbering, massive size and incredible strength means that they can quite often do a lot of ancillary or collateral damage just by collapsing structures and things like that. Particularly if they've come up in the middle of a castle or other fortified structure, they can bring down towers and things like that and kill hundreds of people. And then they'll just busy themselves mopping up whatever bodies are in the area by just sort of crawling around in a concentric circle as they eat everything in their path, along with all the rocks and things like that, and spit things out. And there'll be a tangled wreckage of bits of gold, silverware and suits of armor and bent shields and burnt and smoking bits of organic material which were too big for it to digest. Old bits of oak tables and things like that come cavorting out the end of it. So yeah, and you can imagine a colossal size one of these coming up below you and managing to almost swallow the entire party of adventurers with a 10-foot gullet. So yeah, quite an epic colossal beast, and always a pretty epic fight, particularly as they come bursting up out of the ground beneath you. So they haven't had a lot of cover outside of D&D. They featured in the novel Extinction by Lisa Smedman, and they were in Paizo's book Dungeon Denizens Revisited from 2009 on pages 40 and 45. And yeah, there's a bit of info on them on the Wikipedia on Forgotten Realms, including earlier versions of them, but not a lot really. And they're considered, of course, to have neutral alignment, and their aggressiveness is instinctual rather than malicious. So they're not overly fond of anybody, and they won't ally themselves with anybody because they're just worms. Yeah. So there you go, everybody. Purple worms. If you have any questions, as usual, please let me know in the comment section down below. And I'll have an announcement video sometime during the week outside of my normal upload schedule to talk about the future of the channel and some developments in YouTube and things and some exciting news. So thanks for listening, everybody, and I'll catch you again soon.